All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming into the webinar today. My name is Michelle Proscia. I'm the Ag Educator over at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Sullivan County. And with us today, we have Jessica Terry from NOFA, New York, who is the certification co-director, who has graciously agreed to present today, and we are very excited. So basically the idea of this webinar here is that I've received a ton of inquiries and phone calls about the organic certification process. So I thought who better to bring in to kind of explain and go over some details on that than NOFA themselves. So just to let you know about the Zoom platform here, there is a chat box. If you'd like to go ahead and ask any questions, you can raise your hand. However you'd like to go about doing that. I think Jessica might have some instructions that she wants to detail once she gets the presentation going. But if you have any questions, just shoot them in the chat box, and I'd be happy to relay that information over. So with that, Jessica, if you don't mind, I will turn it over to you, and I will mute myself and be here if you need it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Like Michelle said, my name is Jessica Terry, Certification Co-Director with NOFA New York. We're the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our organization when we get to that slide, but I'm here today to talk to you guys about the organic certification process. I'm going to move through a lot of material pretty quickly. So if you have questions, like Michelle was saying, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, to interrupt, go ahead and unmute if you want and say them or raise your hand or whatever, because it's a more interesting and dynamic conversation when we're talking about some of these rules and regulations, and you want to know how they might apply to your operation specifically. So please don't hesitate. It seems like we have a small group right now, so the more interactive it could be, I think the more fun and interesting it'll be for us as well. So there's that part. If anyone wants to, please feel free to introduce yourself on chat. Like you could say what farm you're with or who you are, or if you're interested in getting certified organic and what kind of production you do. If you're doing like crops or livestock or on-farm processing, because that'll help me also kind of like tailor as we go through. Like I might skip through some slides depending on our time. Also, Michelle, should I be trying to keep this to about an hour? And then we'll have time for Q&A after, or we'll just kind of wing it?
Oh, you're the boss. We
okay.
we have plenty of time, and I have time after to stay.
It just helps me when I know where we are in the presentation. So, all right. So we'll just kind of talk through it. And yeah, so I started with the chat intro. I mean, kind of introed myself anyways, but just to let you know where I live and, but yeah. Okay. So let's get going through the slides. So today we're going to talk about we have an overview of the certification process. We're going to talk about the USDA National Organic Program regulations as they apply to crops, livestock, and processing, aka handling, record keeping, since that's a pretty important part of becoming certified organic, and the Q&A can happen throughout and after. So NOFA New York, we are an organization based in New York State. We have been around since 1982 and had organic standards before there was a federal standard or a national standard, so we're a pretty grassroots organization. We're broken into two branches. We have our parent company, which is NOFA New York, Inc. They're based out of Syracuse, New York. They do more with farmer and consumer education, advocacy work. They do events and promotion. They're the ones who hold the field days, the annual winter conference, and they do technical assistance. So they're kind of our education branch. We like to think of them. And then there's the certification branch, which is who I'm with, NOFA New York Certified Organic LLC. We're based out of Binghamton, New York. We are accredited to the USDA National Organic Program. We got accredited in 2002 to certify farms and processors to the organic standards. We verify compliance to those standards. We help farmers and processors, answer questions and determine whether their management or their land or their practices or whatever is compliant and able to be certified organic or not. So that's sort of what we do. We think of ourselves as more regulatory, and we think of the parent company as more like education and outreach. So what is organic? It's a labeling term for food or other ag products produced using cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that support natural resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity in accordance with the USDA organic regulations. Kind of like to start with that because sometimes people kind of forget what the point is. I feel like organic is really prominent right now. And I mean, it's all around us. And sometimes we forget, like, what does it actually mean? Like, what is the point of it? So yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go through. So just a little history and overview. The USDA National Organic Program standards went into effect in 2002 based on the Organic Food Production Act of 1990. The NOP, which is what we call shorthand for National Organic Programs, so you'll probably hear me say that quite a lot, NOP. They accredit independent agencies such as NOFA New York to perform that organic certification process. The USDA does not certify themselves. They are not a certifier. They are just, they're the accreditor, the accrediting body. So they watch us, and just like we watch our farms and processors. Scopes of organic certification include crops, livestock, handling, which is basically anything that happens after harvest or post-harvest. So it's on-farm processing and any other type of thing that might happen, and wild crops. So here's a little map we have. It's a little out of date. It's about a year or so since we last had GIS plotted, but this kind of gives you a little bit of a representation of what our certified operations look like around the state. So we currently have just over 1,100 now. So we're a little bit higher than that map shows. You can see like the blue dots are the dairies and the red is crop or non-dairy livestock or maple is sort of all lumped together. And the little orange dots, which are harder to see, is our handling and processing operations. So it's interesting to see. And fun fact, New York State is now the second largest state in the United States for organic producers, number of organic producers. We were third until I think just this year. We were third after Wisconsin, and California, of course, is number one. So yeah, so that's exciting. It's a big state for organic production. So the annual certification process. If you want to be certified organic, it's an annual process. You go through this same basic process every year. The first step is you submit a complete application along with your certification fee payment. We are going to review your application for compliance and then issue a letter letting you know if there's any other information we might need and to get you prepared for your on-site inspection. And an inspector will be assigned at that time. We mainly work with contract inspectors, so they will get assignments from us and the files, and then they will contact you on their own to schedule that on-site inspection. The inspectors are the eyes and the ears. They observe and report. They don't make any certification decisions. So they are trained and they go out into the field and verify that you are following your organic system plan, that your management practices are as indicated, and that there aren't any compliance, if there are or are not compliance issues. So that's sort of the role of the inspector. So you'll have your on-site inspection, and then that report comes back to the office. We do a final review and make a certification decision at that time. And then you will get your determination or decision letter, which will let you know if you're certified or continuing to be certified, if you're pending, if there are some things that need to be resolved before we can issue your certificate. There could be reminders, missing documents, different things that we need to sort of finish up the process for that year. You'll also get your certificate at that time if it's not pending. And then that's pretty much it. And then we start the whole process over again. So, you know, for first year applicants, we usually can complete the process in about 3 months from receipt of a complete application. Once you're certified, it can happen anytime during the growing season. So Okay, so who can use the term organic? You must be certified. You have to go through this process. If you want to say 100% organic, if you want to use the word organic, or made with organic. So those are the three labeling categories of organic certification. So it's not a word that you can just willy-nilly throw around if you are out there selling at a farmer's market or selling in a retail store or anywhere. You can't just use the word organic unless you are certified. Except there are a couple exemptions. So if you have gross organic annual sales of under $5,000, you can use the word organic. You can't say certified. You can't use any of the seals or anything like that, but you can say organic. But you have to follow the standards, and you have to be willing to be audited. So that is something we like to mention. A lot of times with really small scale farms, this was built into the regulations in order so that really small scale operations can benefit from the use of the word when they're following those without having to pay a certification fee payment, which at times could be cumbersome. And then we also like to remind folks that this is a voluntary program. You're choosing to be certified organic. I mean, maybe your market is requiring it, but ultimately, this is a choice you're making. But the regulations are mandatory. If you're going through this process, we can't just not, verify that you're complying to all of them because they don't make sense. We hear that a lot, like things like, compost regulations or something that aren't always the most practical. Doesn't really matter because they are the regulations, and we have to verify that they're being followed. And so you as the farmer or the operation also need to make sure you're following them if you're choosing to be certified. And there are civil penalties. We have seen those levied by the National Organic Program for folks who have misused the term. So it is a real thing. Okay, so the first step to becoming certified organic is establishing your organic system plan, or OSP. You probably will hear that a lot if you go through this process. So what is it? It's the living document of how you will manage your farm or operation as certified organic. It's also kind of informally how we refer to like that main piece of your application. When you get your application packet, there's going to be like a big form or booklet with lots of different questions in it that covers, history on your fields, your management practices, soil fertility, crop pest and weed and disease management, storage, post-harvest handling, labeling. If you're a split operation, if you have conventional and organic production, cleaning and sanitation, lots of different things. So, we're kind of asking you all of those questions of how you're planning to manage when you're certified so we can verify compliance to those regulations. And there's a little list here of what's in a complete application, just to sort of give you an idea. Other than that main OSP document, there's, other related forms that come along with it. We provide all of that. If you're interested, you can get it on our website, or we email it, or we do hard copies. So basic land requirements, this is sort of the first thing you need to assess if you're thinking about being certified organic and you want to certify land. Is your land eligible? So the baseline for that is that it has to be free of prohibited substances for at least 3 years. So that would be things that would be considered prohibited, which we'll talk a little bit more about materials and inputs, would be treated seeds, GMO seeds, or GMO products. Most conventional fertilizers, pesticides, do have synthetics in them that would make them prohibited. So if you're not sure, you can always check with the office to figure out, does your land qualify or not before you submit your application. We do have a land transition service or a program, so you can sort of go through the process even if your land is not yet eligible, so that you can get used to the process. And there are, I think, some grants and things out there, or at least there were through NRCS and different organizations, like if you're in transition, that you can benefit from that. So that's something to keep in mind. If your land's not quite there yet, but you still want to go through the process, you absolutely can. So, that's kind of really it. We have a form called the New Field History that you fill out, and that basically tells us what's been done to your land for the last 3 years, and you sign off on that. If you have not owned or managed the land, then we have what we call a new field affirmation, and then that gets completed and signed by the previous owner or manager. So you can just get them to sign off on that history. And that's sort of like kind of that baseline. Other land requirements, once you're sort of in process with us, would be crop rotation, which is part of helping to build that soil structure or maintaining the organic matter of the soil. And another thing we like to call out with land, because it comes up particularly for like livestock operations, is treated lumber such as posts and different things. They're not allowed for new installations or replacement purposes. So most of it gets grandfathered in. If you're becoming certified for the first time and you happen to have treated wood on your farm, it's okay. But once you're certified or in that process, you can't use treated wood, and it doesn't get grandfathered in if it's in direct contact with crops. So, I mean, treated wood trellises, for instance, or raised beds would probably never be allowed because they come in direct contact with edible portions of crops, or they could. We do ask for maps. This seems really old school nowadays to see like a hand-drawn map. This is a really nice one, but it is still a thing. We don't see as many hand-drawn ones anymore. We see a lot of satellite maps and computer-generated, which is fine as long as the details are on there. But this is a really good way for our reviewers internally and also the inspectors when they come on site to understand your operation and to get an idea of the natural resources, which is something that needs to be maintained or improved. So it's just a really good way for us to kind of get a better feel for what you're certifying. So things that you have to include on the map would be your compass, your field ID, your fields perimeters with IDs and acreage identified, any sort of buffer zones of note, natural features, roadways, power lines, and things like that. So we're going to talk about some of the regulations as they pertain to crop production. They sort of go in order. Like if you are looking at the regulations manual in front of you, this is sort of like the order that they would go. So the first one is for soil fertility and crop nutrient management. And then we sort of lumped crop rotation in here with it. So requirements for that is that you're using tillage or cultivation practices that maintain or improve the condition of the soil. So that's kind of terminology to keep in mind no matter what you're thinking about is, are you maintaining or improving? So you already heard me say that, and you'll probably hear me say it more because that's sort of the baseline for whether you're meeting soil requirements. So yeah, and so you also have to use crop rotation if you're doing annual crops. It's not as applicable for perennial, though there is some ways that you can use that still. The use of cover crops and the application of plant and animal materials. So this would be things like compost, mulches, things like that. There's some specifics here on this slide about crop rotation. Basically don't grow the same thing 2 years in a row. I mean, that's sort of the easiest way to think about it. If you are doing field crops, it's nice to see 3 years is okay, but more is better, a 5 or 8 year rotation plan, because then that really helps us see the big picture to determine whether that plan, that rotation plan would maintain or improve the soil conditions. So typically we'll see, for instance, a corn, bean, grain rotation for field crops. And for vegetable operations, it's a little more basic. It's more about, we usually look at it by families. So like the families are rotating in different fields or different beds annually, or a cover crop is growing in between. On occasion, we might allow 2 crops grown 2 years in a row with a cover crop between, as long as it's limited. That's part of the normal rotation plan. So yeah, so those are sort of the basics, I think, for soil fertility. So plant matter versus manure versus compost. We get a lot of questions about the difference in what can they use and things like that. So this kind of helps clarify what those requirements are. We're talking about plant matter. Sometimes we'll call it organic matter, not to be confused with organic matter of your soil or the organic matter content, but just basically meaning plant materials. There aren't really any restrictions on this. You can use your different types of mulches or decomposing plant materials or kitchen scraps or whatever you have on your fields without restriction, as long as it's uncomposted plant material and that's it, it's fine. Manure includes raw, aged, piled, basically any form or amount of manure that has not been fully composted per the regulations. We would consider this manure, even if it's, a 20-year-old pile of horse manure, or it's a little bit of manure in a mix of a lot of other stuff. If it hasn't been fully composted, we do have to sort of treat it as, it's not necessarily raw, but we would consider it like raw manure or manure that hasn't been composted. So how that works is there really aren't any restrictions if you are growing crops for animal consumption. So if this is for feed, livestock feed, you can spread manure on your fields and it's fine. The restrictions are for human consumption crops. So how that works in the regulations is you have to incorporate the manure at least 90 or 120 days prior to harvest of the crop, depending on where the edible portion lies. So it's 90 days if the soil does not come in contact with the edible portion, and it's 120 days they have to elapse between when you incorporate the manure to harvest if the edible portion can come in contact. So most things are 120 days. We take a little bit more of a strict interpretation on this, and it's not just does the edible portion like literally touch the ground, but is it possible that particles of the soil could still come in contact for things such as rain splash up or low hanging fruit or something. So we kind of really look at 120 and we'll think about 90 if someone has like a really good plan to prevent that contact, or for things that are clearly well away from the soil. So sweet corn, fruit trees, things like that are 90 days. So yeah, quite a few people use that. What tends to happen is they'll incorporate the manure in the fall. So then they don't have to worry about it for their early crops like lettuces and things like that, you wouldn't have time for that 120 days to go by. We do look at this. It is something that our reviewers and our inspectors look at. They'll look at your applied amendment record at when that manure was applied, and then they'll look at your harvest records and make sure we do issue non-compliances for people who are not following this guideline. So there's something to keep your eye on if you're using it. And then the other option is compost. So this is when you have your plant material and your manure and you're mixing it together. The requirements are pretty specific in the regulations for compost to be used for unrestricted use, meaning you don't have those wait times. There has to be an initial carbon to nitrogen ratio between 25 to 1 and 40 to 1. So that's for your initial feedstocks put together, not the after cooked or anything. This is just before. And then there are temperature and turn requirements. So if you're doing a windrow system, which tends to be most common, you have to maintain a temperature of 131 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 days in the windrow, and you have to turn it a minimum of 5 times in that time frame. If you're doing in vessel or static aerated, it's just maintaining it 3 days at that temperature. So we have a form for that. We have a compost questionnaire that if you are composting on your farm and you want us to review it for unrestricted use, you would just fill that out. And it basically asks all these questions. We have other requirements, not we, but there are other requirements from the NOP for processed manure and vermicompost. So those could also be used for unrestricted use if you meet certain requirements. So yeah, so that's about it for manure and compost. So the next section of the regulations would be about crop, pest, weed, and disease management. So you have to use management practices in your OSP or your organic system plan. including crop rotation, which we already talked about, but it's also useful for pest management, or, when I say pest, it kind of incorporates weed and disease as well. You can use sanitation management practices or cultural practices. And then you would rely on mechanical or physical as sort of like that first line of defense. So that could include things like habitat for natural enemies or non-synthetic controls. There are a lot more options for weed problems because, as most organic farmers know, or farmers in general, the weeds are, they're a thing. Excuse me. So there's quite a list of things that you can use for weeds. So you can use your non-synthetic mulch, mowing, grazing, hand weeding, mechanical cultivation, flame. You can use plastic or synthetic mulch. The way that works is you can use it as long as the mulch is pulled up at the end of the growing season. So we have quite a few folks, vegetable growers, who will use black plastic and pull it up before the end of the year. We do monitor that. So right now, biodegradable mulches, this has been sort of like a hot thing the last few years, not allowed in organic. There is like some good intentions for them to be allowed, but the bottom line is there are still synthetics inside that when it breaks apart into all those little pieces, there is still synthetic material. So those are not allowed currently. So the idea is like you try all of these things, there's like this hierarchy, and then if those things aren't working and it's insufficient to control the problem you might be having, then you rely on an input or a substance that's allowed for use in organic production. So that would be what we would call the national list, which is a section of the regulations which lists out synthetics that are allowed and non-synthetics that are prohibited. So that's sort of the way that the list works when you determine what you can or cannot use on an organic farm. And it's broken out into crop, livestock, and processing inputs. So you would look for the one, whatever you're looking for. And then the way it works is like all naturals or non-synthetics are allowed unless specifically prohibited. And then all synthetics are prohibited unless specifically allowed. So it's a pretty finite list, but it is something that's good as a reference point. But we do encourage everyone to check with their certifier before they apply anything to their land, since it is not always cut and dry. And a lot of materials have inerts and additives and different types of ingredients that might disqualify them, that might not be obvious at face value, like when you're looking at it. So, and across the board, prohibited in always what we call the big three, which is GMOs, genetic modification or cloning, and ionizing radiation and sewage sludge. So there's no way that any of those are allowed in organic. Which is something that's interesting, because when you're out in the stores, you see a lot of this non-GMO project, which is great. I think it's a really useful label, but I think a lot of folks don't realize that organic is also non-GMO, but also, not with pesticides that can harm you and other things. So. So a little bit more about inputs. The reminder that organic certification is not just about switching out conventional for organic approved. Like, this is really more of a management change when you go organic, and that we're looking for those preventative and management practices to ideally be sufficient, and that you only turn to inputs as a last resort. They must be approved prior to use. So like I was saying, there's a lot of nuance in materials review. We do offer it as a service. So if you have a material that you want us to evaluate for allowance in organic production system, we can do so. We have a pretty extensive database that already exists. It's not external right now, but we can search it and provide information on things that we have already reviewed and that are allowed or not allowed. So that's really helpful. And then there are some agencies that we accept materials decisions for. So the biggest one some of you may have heard of is OMRI, or the Organic Material Review Institute. Basically anything that they list as allowed, we would accept for use on an organic farm. Just be careful that you're checking if there's any restrictions or annotations on how it's used. Because we do verify that we're using things as indicated and not just, kind of willy-nilly. So it's a really good resource, especially for crop farms. Livestock materials, they don't have as many, but we do a lot of livestock material review internally. And we do have a list that's on our website for livestock materials. So that's helpful as well. We also accept WSDA, which is Washington State Department of Ag, and CDFA, which is California Department of Food and Agriculture. They are both recognized material review programs or organizations recognized by the NOP. So that's why we accept their listings as well. Otherwise, we would review them internally. So yeah, this is definitely another area that we issue non-compliances for frequently. And at times, we have to decertify land, because if someone applies something that's prohibited, we really don't have a choice. It's, must be free of prohibiteds for 3 years. And even if it's an accident, or, the company the neighbor contracted with sprayed the wrong field, or, the salesman down the road said it was okay for organic, or, there's all these different scenarios. The bag said so. We get that one a lot. It's tricky because when you're looking at inputs, it's not really regulated under the National Organic Program or the USDA. I guess it could obtusely fall under FDA perhaps. So there's really no regulation of organic claims on fertilizer and inputs. So you can see a lot more like mislabeling and things occurring there that's really confusing. So we always say don't trust what the bag says. If you see the Omri logo, that's probably okay, but definitely check the Omri website. They have a really easy website to search for, or check with your certifier, because there's definitely been many times where we see things on bags and, we'll report them or ask them to stop or do a cease and desist. But ultimately, we don't have any authority over how input companies, fertilizer companies, and what manufacturers, how they label. So it's quite a weird thing. Okay, so next we'll talk about seeds. This is another really common area if you're getting into organic, is what are the seed requirements? So organic seed is required if commercially available. So what does that mean? It means that you have to use organic seed if you can find it. But if you can't find what you're looking for in the correct quality, quantity, or form, and you've checked at least 3 viable sources for organic seed, then you can use conventional seed as long as it's untreated and non-GMO. So that's kind of how that works. Depends on what you're farming. There is a lot of organic seed out there now. There's a lot more than there used to be, and I think it's continuing to expand. So yeah, but if you can't, you document it. You have that documentation available for your inspector to review. You checked 3 websites. You called 3 companies. You checked 3 catalogs. It doesn't have to be complicated. And it is nice to have that quality, quantity, or form as well. So you might find organic seed, but you've tried it before and it doesn't germinate well or something, and you can document that as a quality concern. Or you need, a large amount and you can only buy small packs. Well, that's not a quantity that can work for you then. And so then you don't need to buy it. So, there are ways that make this a little more sensible when you're looking for organic seed. And form is another way of saying variety. So, if you can't find the variety you're looking for, then you can use your conventional seed. So we do look for documentation if you're using conventional seed that it is untreated and non-GMO. So that is something to keep in mind, to make sure that either the invoice says it or the seed tag or whatever you have indicates that. Transplants or annual seedlings must be certified organic. There's no exceptions to that. So if you're out buying plants, make sure you're inquiring and getting that organic certificate before you plant them in your field. We sometimes get people who get transplants. They say, yep, they're organic. We ask for your organic certificate. They don't have it. They go and try and get it from the place they purchased it from, and it turns out they're not actually certified. So definitely make sure that you are, keeping an eye on the documentation that's needed when you are sourcing stuff. Pelleted seed might be allowed. It depends what the pellets are. There's a lot more certified organic pelleted seed out there now. So could probably update this slide. Perennials kind of fall into the same requirements. You have to use organic if commercially available. There's just a lot less organic perennial stock out there. So we see a lot more non-organic stock. And then how that works is if you're intending to sell the plant or sell it as planting stock, you have to manage it organically for 1 year before you can sell it as organic. Yep. Inoculants must be non-GMO. That's it for seeds. Buffer zones. When you're looking at your fields, thinking about becoming certified, you have to kind of pay attention to what's going on around you. You have to prevent the unintentional application of prohibited materials. Like I was saying before, there's really no oops, there's no get out of jail free. If your field gets contaminated, there's really no choice other than to pull it from certification. So it's pretty important. We do have some guidelines in our guidance manual, like starting points. We're not allowed to tell you how big your buffer zone must be, because we, as a regulatory agency under regulations, we're not allowed to help you overcome barriers or obstacles to certification. So it's actually in the regulations that we can't do that. So if we gave you a number, we'd be telling you how to do that, and we can't do that. So, but we do have starting points. So like a basic buffer zone is 50 foot. Like that's sort of like your baseline starting point. If there is spraying happening in the field next door, kind of regular spraying, not air blast or anything like that. And then you have to look at, what's the wind direction? What is the actual buffer zone consist of? Is it just, empty land? Is it flat land? Is it a hedgerow? Is it something else? Is it a waterway? And then so some of those factors could become part of the decision making of more or less distance needed. So if it's a really thick hedgerow, you might not need 50 feet. If it's just open space and the wind is blowing your way, you might need more than 50 feet. So we kind of ask you to establish that on your own. The inspectors come out and assess. And then if they deem that it's not adequate, you're given a chance to come up with a plan. So it wouldn't be a case where we would just be like, oh, sorry, you can't be certified. We'd probably be like, well, this is an inadequate buffer zone. Like, what are you planning to do to increase it? And what will you do with any area that might be contaminated? So you could just make it a larger buffer zone. Sometimes we'll have people who do crop fields, like take the outside rows, for instance, as non-organic, and then do a clean out or purge of the equipment, and then take the interior as organic. There's other options. So we definitely will work with you at the buffer zone stage to get to a point where, that it works. As far as GMO, like contamination, the biggest thing really that we deal with here in New York is corn. So if you're growing field corn, definitely take into consideration if conventional field corn is being grown near you. Most likely, I think, I'm not sure, but probably most conventional corn is GMO. So, there's not really a reasonable buffer zone that can be established to prevent cross-pollination during tasseling if you're doing corn. So I don't know, there was some guideline of like 660 feet or something between fields, and that's just not really realistic for most farmers. So what we do in that situation is ask you to monitor and document the planting dates and the corn type, and most importantly, the tasseling dates. So if you and the neighbor's corn are tasseling at least 2 weeks from each other, then we usually say that's minimal risk of cross-contamination, and then it's okay. So it is definitely something to pay attention to if you're doing corn. We might do GMO testing. We might request you do GMO testing if we think there could be contamination. There is obviously other GMO crops out there, so GMO soybeans, of course, But in our experience, your typical 50-foot buffer zone is enough because they self-pollinate and don't travel very far. The pollen doesn't travel as far. So that's not as big a concern. And I don't know if this is just like a don't ask, don't tell thing, but it doesn't appear as if alfalfa is becoming really a thing yet. It's in our organic communities. So we're not seeing a lot of that. It is a thing. It is out there. I mean, I think we're all terrified if GMO alfalfa takes hold that that's all there's going to be. But right now, we ask the questions. And if you do have GMO alfalfa, you basically have to eradicate the stand before you could grow any sort of organic alfalfa there. So we do testing. I was telling you we might do GMO testing, but regardless, we do pesticide testing on 5% of all of our operations annually. It's part of our requirements. So that is another way in the checks and balances system. Okay, so we're going to jump into livestock. I'm not sure if any of you out there are doing any livestock. Some of it's a little redundant, so I might move, kind of quickly through some of these slides. All livestock have, no matter what production type you're doing, some of them have the same requirements. So all livestock need certified organic pasture or outdoor access areas. So no matter what if you're doing cows, chickens, or swine, or whatever it is, they all have to have certified organic outdoor access or pasture. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are buying certified organic livestock, you need to get your land certified first. I'm going to make sure that you have that land certification in place before you bring organic animals there, because otherwise they could become decertified. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If you're transitioning, obviously it all kind of happens together. You transition your land and your herd generally at the same time. If you're doing poultry and you're doing pullets, you can have your pullets outside for a brief period of time while we're working with you for that inspection. Then they wouldn't be considered decertified. So that would be like one small exception to that. Certify land before you bring the animals on. If you have like a pre-existing herd, if you're doing meat like beef or sheep or something, basically none of your pre-existing animals would ever be considered certified organic for slaughter, but their offspring could be. So that's sort of how that works. They would just be breeder stock, and you'd manage them organically, and their offspring could be considered organic. We'll get into more of those details for like the different types as we go through. The other thing is, unless you're only doing poultry or pigs, which don't technically require pasture, just outdoor access, you would need to have a pasture plan in place. This is in your organic system plan, so that would be in that document you fill out. Pasture plan consists of location and size of pastures, grazing methods, fencing, location and source of shade and water, and any sort of fertility or seeding or what your management is of that land. They do say that pasture is a crop, so you have to think of it in the same way. You can't just have a piece of land and do nothing with it. Under organic practices, you still have to have that organic management in place. It can be pretty simple, but yeah, there needs to be something. So just like we had the field maps or our maps for livestock operations, these would be barnyard layout or a poultry diagram. Basically, we want to get a view of the housing area, storage areas for the feed, outdoor access areas. They don't have to be complicated, but it is good to see where all that stuff is. And if you have any non-organic production, where that's located or how that's being segregated. So this slide is kind of about poultry. If you're looking to certify poultry, this is like specific to how it applies to that type. For poultry, they must be managed organically from second day of life. So a lot of people will buy conventional day olds, in the mail, and then you get them ideally the next day, and then you manage them organically from that point, and then they can be considered certified organic. Pre-existing flocks would not be certifiable. If you're buying purchased or already started pullets, like I mentioned earlier, they have to be certified organic. We do have an ID system. You're required to have an ID system for all of your livestock types. You don't have to individually ID your birds, but just having a flock record works. Feed, you must receive only certified organic feed. When we talk about feed, we're also talking about things like feed additives or feed supplements. Anything that's sort of fed on a more or less regular basis has to be certified organic. It includes food scraps, if you're feeding them scraps. We look for that verification of organic status either on the bag if you're buying like a retail feed, or that you get an organic certificate with the load if you're buying a large scale. Healthcare has to be allowed per the regulations. So these are like those sections I was telling you about with the synthetics and the non-synthetics. There's also sections that apply to healthcare for livestock, and we review those materials. They don't have to be certified organic if it's for just for healthcare uses, for things like naturals. Vaccines are allowed. We look for non-GMO vaccines. FDA-approved vitamins and minerals are allowed. With poultry, minimal beak trimming and wing clipping is allowed if needed. Living conditions for poultry, for all the types, must allow for the health and natural behavior of the species. So our guideline for poultry is at least 1.5 square foot of space per bird, indoor and outdoor. So we want at least that much space inside their housing and in their outside, in their outdoor access areas. For turkeys, it would be 3 square foot per bird. So that's sort of like a rough guideline. No cages or wired floors are allowed. The bedding, it depends on what you're using. Typically in poultry, we see shavings, like a poultry house. They have to be untreated since it's not a certifiable product, wood shavings. Hay or straw is considered certifiable or agricultural product that has to be certified organic. So any bedding that is agricultural has to be certified organic. They have to receive daily year-round outdoor access. There are lists of temporary exemptions in the regulations of reasons why they might not get daily outdoor access. So inclement weather, I think, is the big one we see here in New York, which for poultry, of course, is a very real thing. But there still needs to be a way that they can get outside on nice days in the winter. So it could just be an open door. I mean, you don't have to like force them out the door, but they need to be able to access the outdoors in a way that's fairly obvious to them when it's appropriate, unless like one of these temporary exemptions is applying. So, yeah, direct access to sunlight, fresh air, able to demonstrate their natural behaviors. So that's sort of basic for all of the different livestock types here. So pigs, this starts sort of all the other livestock types where we're not talking second day of life. They must be managed organically from the last third of gestation. So that's sort of the guideline for all of the other types of livestock in order for them to qualify for organic slaughter, organic meat, last third of gestation. So we consider organic management beginning when we receive your application. That's sort of like when we have that received in the office, that's sort of when the clock starts, when we're looking at that last third. So any pre-existing or breeder and any that are at last third at that point or forward, their offspring would qualify. We do require animal IDs on individual pigs for swine certification. Again, all certified organic food, feed and food, certified organic. Outdoor access areas, same thing with healthcare. There's really no difference with the types at this point. Daily year-round outdoor access. Ruminants, very similar, managed organically from last third of gestation. Must have IDs, permanent IDs. For dairy, there is the one-time opportunity to transition a conventional dairy herd to organic production. So that's a whole herd, one-time opportunity. So you have all the animals you want ready to go. You start your transition. You have organic management practices, feed, outdoor access, all of the things for and pasture for the year. And then you would be eligible to ship organic milk after that point. So for ruminants, there are additional requirements for dry matter intake. So this is how much of their nutritional or intake that they're getting from pasture during the grazing season. So there is a minimum requirement of at least 30% of that dry matter intake requirement being met from pasture. So we recommend 0.75 acres of pasture per 1,000-pound animal as like a guideline for determining if you have enough pasture to support your herd with these DMI, dry matter intake or DMI requirements. They have to be on pasture continuously through the grazing season. There are temporary exemptions when they could be inside, just like any of the other species. And then, obviously, if you're milking, they would come in to milk, then they would go back out. You can't leave them in between milkings. You can't leave them in overnight unless it's inclement weather or you're documenting some other exemption as to why. So having an outdoor access calendar in the barn is really helpful because then you can kind of keep track of when you're keeping them in. And it is something the inspectors will look for, how you're documenting. There's places in the organic system plan that you document that as well, but it's helpful to have that for when you vary from, what's documented. We do most of you can do the calculations, the inspectors will do the calculations, and we do the calculations internally. We have a form for how you determine if you're meeting that 30%. So it seems a little intimidating at first, but it's not that bad. You kind of just spell out what you're feeding and you can determine how much dry matter is in those stored feeds. So if you're supplementing with, say, a little bit of grain through the grazing season, or you put a couple bales out, you can kind of factor that in and figure out, are you still meeting the 30%? And that is average over the grazing season. So in New York State, it's really, really easy to get 30%. If they're out on primarily pasture for like May and June, when it's really easy and lush, even if they're like 80%, you can really drop off in the dry months and still get an average that's over 30%. So it's really quite easy to meet this requirement. It just seems you just need to kind of be paying attention to it and make sure you're documenting everything. Yeah, I mean, there are some feed things if you get into dairy transition. I don't think we have any dairy farmers here I'm listening today, but if anyone has any questions about how the transition and the fields and the feed works, if you're transitioning a herd, we can get into that. But I'm not thinking that's going to be the case. So healthcare for ruminants, this slide just sort of details out some of the more common ones, just so you have an idea what's prohibited and what's allowed. Obviously, antibiotics, hormones, most synthetic medications or anything with animal byproducts is prohibited. You can't use parasiticides or wormers in slaughter stock. No tail docking in cattle. There is organic milk replacer out there now, so there are some milk replacers that are available for organic operations, but traditional ones are not allowed. Synthetic amino acids are prohibited. Things that are allowed: vaccines, mineral and salt formulations, homeopathy and herbs, FDA-approved vitamins, minerals, and if you're dairy, you can use parasiticides with the withhold on the milk time. So that's just a few of the more common ones. What else do we got? So living conditions, again, very similar. Must allow for the health and natural behavior of the species, can't be confined, have that outdoor access, clean, dry bedding, no treated wood where the animals can come in contact with it. And there's some examples of some of the things that you can, there's temporary exemptions for when you can keep them inside if you need to. So it can be birth and dry off. If you have a really muddy area, it could be a jeopardy to the soil or water or to them, to their health and safety. So, there are times when can be practical and you can keep them inside as needed, just as long as it's not abused. Meat requirements: if you are doing organic slaughter, you can sell, live animals, whether or live parts, so the whole, half, or quarters, you can sell them off the hoof as certified organic. And then once that sale has been made, whoever's buying that meat, it's up to them how they want to have it butchered or processed, and they're using it for their own personal use. It can't be resold as certified organic once, unless it's getting processed in a certified organic slaughterhouse. So there aren't that many of them around, and from what I understand, they have a really long wait time. So if you're looking to do this, start thinking ahead for how you might want to market or get your meat processed. On-farm processing and value added, I guess I'll go pretty quickly through this. I see we're at just about 1 o'clock and I want to have some time for Q&A. So I'll move pretty quickly, I think, through these. Facility diagram, again, of your processing area and what's required. flow chart is an additional thing. When you're doing processing, we kind of want to see that step-by-step of how you're taking in the ingredients, where they're being stored, processed, packaged, and what record keeping you're keeping along the way, and any sort of organic control points, which is places where you could have contamination or commingling concern, and how you're dealing with that. So this is the same thing with the organic control points. It's just something to keep in mind if you are processing, is where are the places in your system where there's weakness, and what are you doing to make sure that you're not compromising the integrity of the organic product. Cleaning and sanitation, you'll want to list out what materials you're using. If you're doing a clean out and purge of the equipment, what that standard operating procedure looks like. You can use chlorine. That's our most common sanitizer that's allowed. You can use it per labeled EPA recommended dilution levels. Most conventional soaps and cleaning products are allowed as long as you are rinsing them or doing some other intervening event to make sure that any of residue is removed. So it's pretty easy. The only one to pay attention to is quaternary ammonia. So that's a pretty restrictive sanitizer, and it unfortunately is also very common in a lot of bigger processing facilities. Quats are designed to persist on surfaces, so they're really hard to get rid of. So we recommend don't use quaternary ammonia products, but if you absolutely have to, it's very, very restricted. Standard operating procedure you'd need to have in place to make sure there's no residue. Pest controls, we look at what you're using for that inside your facilities. There is a hierarchy as to how you manage your pests, which we will verify in your organic system plan, and the inspectors will look at as well. So we're talking about processed products that you can have 100% organic, or made with organic. Those are those three labeling categories I had mentioned. There are different requirements for each of them. So, we kind of really take you through that process with some of our forms when you go through that to determine, does your recipe meet the labeling category for whatever you're trying to use. For most traditional organic products, they have to be at least 95%, or they have to be at least 95% certified organic agricultural products. The other 5% are things from the national list. So non-organic things, baking soda or enzymes or, natural colors and things like that. So there is like a list of things that are allowed, but it can only be in that less than 5%. Made with is a whole other category. I'm not going to get too into it today because it's not really that common. We talked about this a few times. These are the sections of the list that pertain to the handling or processing side of things, and what's allowed or not allowed for non-organic ingredients in your processed products. When we look at your ingredients, if you're doing a processed product, we're looking for that organic verification, so an organic certificate, or if you're buying a retail product, that on the label or the bag, it indicates that it's organic and indicates the certifier, certified organic by, followed by the name of a certifier. That's really what you need to look for if you're buying an ingredient that's retail packaged, that it has that certification statement. Otherwise, it may not even be organic. So there are some pretty restrictive labeling requirements, so definitely get all of your labels approved before you use them. The USDA organic seal can be used in the specified colors. The NOFA seal can be used. There's other maize things you can use, percentage statements and different things. The only musts, if you're designing a label, is you have to include that certification statement, as I was mentioning. And if you have multi-ingredient, that all the ingredients are identified as organic in the ingredient statement. There's a lot of nuance to label review, so can't even get into it today. But if anyone's curious, feel free to ask. We do have international trade agreements. We need to update this slide. We currently have equivalency arrangements with Canada, European Union, Japan, Korea, Switzerland, Taiwan, and what's missing from the slide is UK, because Brexit, officially occurred, and the UK is not part of the European Union anymore. So we do actually have an equivalency arrangement with the UK. So that is also one of them. Lots of weird requirements when it comes to international. So again, if anyone wants more info, we've got information on our website, or you can feel free to reach out. Record keeping, this is a really, really big part, no matter what kind of operation you have. You have to be able to track your organic product from start to finish. So for a crop, it would be from seed to the point of sale at the market. For livestock, it would be basically from the mother, or whatever that starting point was, the egg, to the point of sale at the market. We call that the traceability or traceback audit. When the inspectors show up on site every single year, they're going to be doing a traceback audit, and they're going to be doing a mass balance or an in-out balance. So how that works is, for the traceability audit, it's pretty easy. They'll probably just pick one thing and have you demonstrate how your system traces it through. And then for the in-out balance, they're going to start at the other end, and they're probably going to pick some harvest. So they might say, show me your sales records for butternut squash for the third quarter of the year or something. And then they're going to take that total amount, and they're going to trace it back to your harvest, back through your transplant or seeding records, your seed quantities, to make sure it all tracks. So that is something that occurs, and it's a really important part of the integrity of the organic supply chains. So yeah, you have to keep your records for 5 years. So make sure you're keeping those. We do supply basically all of the forms you need, but you're welcome to have your own system as well, as long as everything required is being documented. So it's just a couple slides that show some examples of some of the records that you may need to keep. There's plenty of them, and we'll let you know if you're missing anything. So these are basically like farm records, harvest sales records, equipment cleanout logs. If you're doing livestock, purchase feed log, livestock medication, healthcare record, feed ration DMI forms. We've talked about some of these. This slide is a really good one that shows you an example of what we're talking about. We're talking about traceability with a simple process product. So we're looking for like that lot number or that unique identifier to track through the system. So this one shows like a purchase of an ingredient with a lot number, which transfers to their production log, where that lot number for the ingredient now has a lot number that they have assigned it, and then that final lot number wound up on the invoice. So this is a really good way to kind of get an idea of what the inspectors are looking for. They want to see these 3 documents, and they want to see everything match up. If it doesn't, now you might get a non-compliance, or you might have to come up with a better system. So records for processed products. And and then once you're certified, we kind of go through that process every year. Like I was saying, you have an annual inspection every year. We did perform quite a few virtual inspections since COVID. So that would have been in 2020 and 2021. We're trying to phase them out as much as possible, depending on how the situation continues to unfold. But once you're certified and you're deemed low risk and you're tech capable, you could possibly get a virtual inspection. So that is also a thing. So every year you get your annual. We do spot or unannounced inspections on minimum 5% of our operations. That's when the inspector is just going to show up unannounced to look at some part of your production. We do that at least 5% residue testing I mentioned. We will do market monitoring. And of course, if we receive a complaint, we will be doing complaint investigations as well. I'm not sure if anyone needs to know why be certified organic. There's lots of benefits to being organic. Career opportunities. I think we put this slide together for a college who was trying to get, students to think about options that they may have. Being an inspector is something that there's always a need for. There's a real need for qualified folks out in the field, or working with the certifiers in the office as well. So yeah, if anyone's interested, let us know. All right, so that is all I have. You're welcome to ask questions. There's some resources on this slide. And then also, we do have our annual winter conference coming up. It is online, so it's really easy to attend. We have lots of cool workshops. The tech went really well last year, so it was really fun. So check out the website if anyone's interested in that. But if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask however you like to.
Thank you very much. This was excellent. I mean, I know I learned a lot more than I've ever known about organic in this short presentation. It's
That's a
definitely
lot.
it's a lot, but it makes sense as far as some of the regulations and how it's all laid out. It's very similar to a lot of other programs as well, including FSMA with food safety practices also. So um, I
Yeah.
will check the chat box where folks want to unmute, but I did have a couple questions if I
Sure.
can start the ball.
Yeah.
As far as funding or cost share, are there any programs out there that can assist farmers with for the price of organic certification?
Yes, I can't believe the cost share slide wasn't in here. What happened to it? Now I wonder. Yes, thank you, Michelle. Very good question. So yes, there is a federal cost share program that has been in existence for many, many years. I've been with NOFA for like 13 years, so at least as long as I've been around, it's been there. But it covers a portion of your certification fees up to a cap per scope. So right now it's 50%. It'll cover 50% of your certification fees up to $500 per scope. So if you're doing crops and livestock, you could get 500 for each of those, depending on what your fee scale is. And different certifiers have different fee structures. Ours at NOFA New York is based on gross organic sales. So we have like a sliding scale chart depending on what your gross organic sales are. And then that gives you an amount that would be your base certification fee, which includes inspection. Yep. Thanks, Michelle. I don't know of any other, there might be some other programs or grants out there, but I'm not aware of them specifically.
Yeah, that's the one that I was thinking about.
Yeah, cost share. It
Yeah.
used to be 75%. COVID knocked it down to 50, and there's been a lot of people really fighting to get that back to 75%. And we think it seems very possible, but at least all we're told right now, I think it's through 2023 or something, and it's 50% reimbursement. Yep.
Okay. Well, better than nothing, right?
Yeah, a lot better.
My other question here is about so organic certification is not only for farms but also folks who or is it folks who want to process like a value added product into another product? So that person would also become certified organic for the product that they're making.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, if you want to create an organic product, you have to be certified. Doesn't matter where in the chain you are. So obviously, if you're a farm growing crops or livestock, you have to be certified. But yeah, if you're handling, even just handling in a very simple way, you have to be certified in order to sell that product as certified organic. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously processors, but it could be something like, feed mills, service providers too. So like bottling, coffee roasters. I mean, there's no end to thinking of like how many variations on this idea of processing or handling. But everyone in the supply chain and to the point of sale needs to be certified organic. And I didn't mention this, but there's a new rule coming. It's anticipated right now for next year. It's called Strengthening Organic Enforcement. And it's a huge rule change coming through the USDA National Organic Program that is going to require every step of the supply chain to get certified organic. So right now, for instance, distributors don't have to be certified organic if they don't alter the packaging. They're basically buying in product and then selling it. They're going to have to become certified organic. So anyone who buys and sells organic product will have to become certified organic. So that's going to be a huge change because right now those are all considered excluded or exempt. Yep. Very good question. Thank you.
My last question here is speaking about treated wood. You'd mentioned, using treated wood for around field growing is obviously prohibited. But what about like for post-harvest structures? That's not in the field itself, but is that something that you can use for a structure or no?
Yeah, you definitely can. I mean, we sort of look at it as like, is it in direct contact with organic production, or is it outside what we would call organic production? So obviously buildings, are fine. If it's a table and you are using that as your surface to like cut up vegetables or something, then yeah, that might be an issue. So you're kind of thinking about is my organic product coming in direct contact with the pressure treated wood. So pre-existing, outbuildings and greenhouse baseboards, unless there's in-ground plantings that could come in contact with it, would be considered okay. Barns are okay. The things that we say about barns is, the feed troughs and stuff, those can't be pressure treated where it's direct contact with the feed. And if there's like posts that the animals might come in direct contact with, you might need to monitor them. And if there's evidence of chewing of some kind, then you might need to cover it with untreated or do something to prevent that. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, you have to be practical, hopefully.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That was just that was a question I had gotten because it's generally pretty well known about treated wood, but where does that where's the line
Yeah.
on that? So yeah.
There are definitely loopholes, with things like that. Even fence posts who depends, like you can set up like an interior buffer or a hot strand on the inside that like block, like you can have like treated wood corner posts and you have like a strand that cuts them off so the animal can't come in direct contact. And we'd be like, okay. Or so there are things that you can do, but in general, yeah. Yeah.
And work with your inspector through those types of things.
Yeah, or your certifier if you have questions.
Yeah. Okay. There is a question here in the chat. Someone, Kimmel mentioned that they grow greens by hydroponics. Is that able to be certified as of now or no?
Right. So, oh boy, hot topic. NOFA New York does not certify hydroponics at this time. We don't certify hydroponics, aquaponics, or aeroponics, but there are certifiers out there who do. So, this is definitely a hot topic. There's a lot of, debate about the topic of soil being the basis of an organic production site. So if you read the AFPA, which is the act that the standards were based on, it does say that soil is like, instrumental to the organic production. However, the NOP or the USDA National Organic Program has said that hydroponics can be certified. So it's sort of like this weird area where there's certain certifiers who are doing it and there's certain certifiers who are not until they are basically told they have to because of like political reasons. And so right now we fall on the side of not certifying hydroponics, but you could find a certifier who would though. And also it's like an interesting thing of like, who do I certify with? And some people think they have to certify with a certifier that's in their state or something, but that is not true. You can certify with any certifier you want as long as they're willing to come out and go through that process with you. So, we're based in New York State, but we certify in the surrounding Northeast areas. And just within New York State, we certify maybe like 60% of the operation. So there's a lot of other certifiers operating in New York State. So if you're into it, you can go find someone to certify it. But yeah, that's where that's at. Good question. I see another one. Why we have different color presentation of the USDA organic label? Any difference between the three? Yeah, that's a good question. I really didn't get into it because I didn't want to take up a bunch of extraneous time. But yeah, you know what? I'm going to go back to that slide because I don't think it was too far back. I think this is what you're asking here: is why are there three different? So the USDA seal can be used in any of. Actually, no, this slide needs editing too. So there's basically three ways that you can use the USDA seal. You can do the black and white, or you can do green with a brown circle. So you have your black and white version or your color version. If you're using the color version, it has to be green with a brown circle. Can't be all green, can't be all brown, and it actually can't be transparent. We recently realized that there was an error on this slide that showed that transparent background for the green and brown one, and that's not allowed, but you can have a transparent background with the black and white. So you can use black and white, or black on a white background, or black on a transparent background, or the green and the brown on a white background. They're very specific. They're really very specific about how you can use that. So to answer your question, there's not really a difference. It's just there's examples of the ways that you can use the seal. Yep.
And the NOFA one is your seal.
Yeah, we're not
per se?
as restrictive with that. I mean, we would say use it in the color that you're given. We have a black and white version as well. But if someone wanted to say, they have like a one color label and it's all green or something, we'd probably allow you to do a representation all green. We're not quite as restrictive as the USDA is. Yeah. And you don't have to use those. Those are optional, both of them. I mean, a lot of people will call something, they'll be like, how do I get that seal? How do I get that USDA organic seal? And we'll be like, well, it's a little more complicated than us just shipping it over.
Of course, right?
Yeah, well, especially there's like a lot of international. I just feel like the face of organic is changing. You know what I mean? It's like less small scale family farms and more this international scene and these complicated supply chains. And yeah, it's the nature of it, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have enough time to talk about supply chains, but
oh boy, not really.
Are there any other any questions that you guys have? These are very good coming through. I know there was a bunch. There was a question earlier if we are able to get a copy of the slide set that.
Yeah, of course. I did send you the one ahead of time, Michelle, but I did make a couple of edits, so I can send it to you again.
Okay, great. Yep, and I'll send the recording out along with the slide set to all the registrants so they have access to that and can pull through. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. There's a lot of info on our website too, and we have recordings and lots of resource information there. So
wonderful. And that's what's the website address again?
Here, let's go back to that slide. It's nofany.org.
Okay. And if folks want to go ahead and start the process of becoming organic or asking questions, that's the website to best go and navigate through how to do that?
Yeah, you can go to that homepage and then there's like a certification tab. And so if you go to the certification page, there's a bunch of information there on apply for organic certification or about, and there's contact information. If you want to just send an email or call us. Or look at the forms. It should be fairly easily accessed through there. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jessica, thank you very much for your time. This was, again, it was excellent. I really did learn a lot today. So
good. Well, thank you, Michelle, for putting this together, and thank you all who attended. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, I'll let everybody go and finish their lunch here. And
sounds good.
Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.